6 people, one farm, no motive, no arrest, only a house that kept secrets. What if the person who lived with them knew more than anyone? Stay with me. By the end, you'll wish you never knocked on a locked attic door. On a cold March night in 1922, in a sleepy German valley, a family was found murdered. The farmstead had signs, footprints in the snow, meals left on the table, the faint smell of someone sleeping upstairs. But the strangest thing investigators found was evidence that someone had been living in that house after the killings. Tonight we tell the story of Hinterkaifeck, as close to the truth as we can get, and then we will go one step further. Imagine what the people who stayed there felt when reality and suspicion braided into terror. It was called Hinterkaifeck, a small farm, isolated 600 meters from the nearest neighbor. The family there, Andreas, the widowed patriarch, his adult daughter, Victoria, her 2 grown children, Cecilia and Joseph, and Victoria's mother, 72-year-old mother-in-law, an elderly woman who depends on the family. They were ordinary, quiet, the kind of people who leave their boots by the door and their supper on the table. Neighbors said Andreas had built the farm himself, and he was proud of it. He had a strange little hobby. He kept a small workroom in the attic and was known to walk around the night before sunrise, feeding the animals and checking traps. The locals liked the family. No one thought they would vanish into a mystery. In the weeks leading up to the murders, neighbors noticed odd things. Footprints in the snow from the forest to the back door, but only one set of prints returning. Tools moved from their usual places. A newspaper found in the garden, pages turned as if someone had been reading in the dark. Victoria told neighbors she'd found strange tracks in the attic. She'd heard someone walking above the kitchen at night. Probably the cat, she said, but she told a neighbor the next day, "I feel watched." If you imagine the farm as a closed box, these were the first loose screws. Someone came the other night. I left the door open. They left before I saw them. I left them bread. On a Sunday in early March, the family had their usual dinner. The maid had left earlier that day. Late that night, or in the early morning hours, all 6 were killed in the house. When the neighbors grew worried that no one had visited the farm for days, they went to investigate. Inside, investigators found the horrific scene. The bodies were discovered stacked in different rooms. Bloody prints, a sickening quiet. But there were puzzles. The bed in the loft had been slept in after the murders. Someone had used the farm, cleaned up in part, and then left. Food was eaten. Smoke from the stove indicated a fire had been made in the hearth after the worst happened. Who would clean in the house after murdering 6 people and then live in the same home as the dead? The case drew inspectors from the nearest town. They interviewed neighbors. The footprints in the snow were tracked, but they didn't lead far. No murder weapon was conclusively linked. One theory was of an unknown stranger from the surrounding woods. Another theory suggested someone known to the family. Remember those small omens? People started looking at the laundry, the ledger, the guest book, searching for the ordinary person with an unusual motive. But every theory had holes. The man who owned the farm was known to be reclusive, but not cruel. There were wives who had quarrels, but not to this degree. The locals whispered that maybe it was a ghost, or maybe it was karma. The police, trained in facts, had only questions. Here's the part of the story that unsettles people. After the bodies were found, investigators suspected someone had been living in the house after the murders. They found fresh footprints in the snow leading to the barn, the door bolted from the inside, and evidence that the attic was used. Food had been eaten. Someone had been walking above the rooms where the bodies lay. That single fact reframes everything. Imagine, the killer returns, not to flee, but to live in the same house as the evidence. Imagine passing by a kitchen where a family had died, boiling water for tea, as finality and ordinary routine coexist. Why would a murderer stay? Was it confidence, madness, or was something else using the hush to hide? The investigators couldn't prove how long the unknown person stayed. They couldn't connect any outside suspect. And when the town considered a suspect, a drifter, a neighbor with a grudge, the case fell apart. No trial, no closure. Now let's take one step into imagined truth. A plausible, Horrifying possibility stitched from the facts. A relative, someone with daily access to the house, grows bitter at small humiliations, inheritance, a dropped insult, a loss of pride. They snap. They come home to settle accounts, but they don't leave. They can't. The house has changed them. They stay to watch the aftermath, the bodies, the quiet, the mechanical rhythm of a house resetting itself. They pretend to mourn. They mop a floor. They sit by the hearth and listen for the living to breathe, until a neighbor thinks it odd and a policeman knocks, and suddenly the person realizes the walls are witnesses. So they leave. Or they don't. The person who stayed might be not just a killer, but someone who knows the house better than anyone, and the house knows them back. Hinterkaifeck remains officially unsolved. Over the decades, detectives reopened the files, scientists re-examined evidence, and authors wrote books. But the human part of the story, the shivering fact that life carried on in that house after the worst thing had happened, this is the image that lodges in our throat. A house that doesn't let go. True horror isn't always about monsters. Sometimes it's the almost normal choices that make us shiver. Someone who makes a small, inexplicable choice, like leaving the back door unlocked or ignoring a cry can change everything. If you liked this retelling and the twist at the end, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Would you go back into a house that felt watched? Want more real case retellings, or shall we go deeper into the unknown? Either way, thanks for watching. Sleep with the light on. As we close, consider the weight of silence. Not just the absence of sound, but the presence of something lurking just beyond understanding. Sometimes the darkest stories are told in whispers, by the very winds that swept through Hinterkaifeck, carrying with them a tale that refuses to fade. The final thought I leave you with: what if the house, the farm, the very land itself bore witness? The universe sees, it knows, but it doesn't always tell. Are we ready to listen when it decides to speak?